If only one had a bite to eat on such a clear day. Overwhelmed by the impression of the happy morning, I experienced an irresistible sense of well-being and started humming for joy for no particular reason. A woman with a basket on her arm stood outside a butcher shop pondering sausages for dinner. She glanced at me as I walked past. She had only a single tooth in the front of her mouth. Nervous and susceptible as I had become during the last few days, the woman's face made a repellent impression on me right off. That long yellow tooth looked like a little finger sticking up from her jaw, and her eyes were still full of sausage as she turned toward me. I lost my appetite instantly and felt nauseated. When I reached the arcades, I went over to the fountain and drank some water. I looked up. The clock in the Tower of Our Saviors showed 10. Welcome to Positive Read-Ins. You could support this channel and check out new literature by getting your copy of the novel Commuting. You can link to it in the description. You can also link to the Gymnasia Press website and check out other works like the short story collection Comorbidities and the novel Non-Local. Thank you. The opening passage was from Knut Hamsun's breakthrough novel Hunger. This was published in 1890. And it allowed Knut Hamsun to become a full-time writer. He was a struggling writer previous to this, and this was his first breakthrough. It was a change from previous styles of novels, and it made Knut Hamsun not only a popular writer, but he became a popular speaker after this, went on to go give some lectures that were considered controversial at the time because he criticized the works, the novels and the plays that came before him, specifically within Scandinavia, but or Norway, but maybe around the world as well. He was very much influenced by Dostoevsky, whose name appears on the back cover here. And you can see this if you're familiar with Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. The Underground Man seems very much like our unnamed narrator in Hunger. It's a man who doesn't have a place in society. He feels alienated by others. There's almost a certain level of fear by others. He appears almost insane. At least at times insane, and he's a struggling artist. He's trying to produce something, an article, a play, a novel, some form of expression within this kind of commercialized, urbanized society. The novel is set in current day Oslo. At the time, this is called Christiania, and the unnamed narrator is starving throughout this process and throughout the whole novel. There's 4 sections. It's kind of episodic. Each section ends with a change in the unnamed narrator's fortunes. Either he sells an article and gets some money, or someone gives him some money, a friend helps him out. So something to change until the very end, where he decides to take a ship to work on a ship and leaves the city. The passage I read at the opening gives us a good indication of the writing style, which I find maybe exhilarating. I forgot how enjoyable this novel was to read. You can see, you can almost, you experience the excitement that the narrator has over something simple as just a clear day. This kind of peaks of emotion that are followed by valleys of unhappiness. It's very much a manic writer, and it makes a manic reader of us as we go through. He's repelled by people on the street, so we get that almost comical description of the woman with the one tooth sticking up like a finger and with sausages in her eyes, and that fear of of other people is throughout this novel. As I mentioned, this novel was written in 1890, but it has a lot of characteristics of modernism that was coming out in the 1920s. It's concerned with the city and the kind of the flaneur, this streetwalker who needs to be out among people, even though they're kind of repelled by these people, but they need to be out there in seeing them, interacting with them, getting frustrated by the little things about them, getting into arguments, but it's necessary. They feel uncomfortable when they are not around people, and that's definitely our narrator here. We see his interaction. This is early on, another section I wanted to read here, where he's deliberately harassing a stranger that he runs into on the street, a young woman, but she ends up liking this. So he says, when I got as far as Palace Hill, I overtook and passed two ladies. As I walked by, I brushed the sleeve of one of them. I looked up. She had a full, somewhat pale face. Suddenly, she blushes and becomes wonderfully beautiful. I don't know why. Maybe from a word she's heard spoken by a passerby. Maybe only because of some silent thought of her own. Or could it be because I had touched her arm? Her high bosom heaves visibly several times, and she presses her hand firmly around the handle of her parasol. What was the matter with her? So we see how people are this is a new phenomenon. People living in the city, they're strangers, but they brush into each other. Maybe they're making some connection with another person, a stranger, and they don't really know how to deal with it. So he's questioning maybe she is happy because he brushed against her. I stopped and let her get ahead of me again. I couldn't continue on just then. It all seemed so strange. I was in an irritable mood, annoyed with myself because of the mishap with the pencil. So he's angry because he had a vest that he sold to the pawn shop. Throughout the book, he's trying to sell things to the pawn shop to make money to eat. And he left his pencil, the little stub of a pencil, in his jacket, which he goes back and gets, which is even more demoralizing for him. So with the mishap with the pencil, and highly stimulated by all the food I had put away on an empty stomach, all at once my thoughts, by a fanciful whim, take an odd direction. I'm seized by a strange desire to frighten this lady, to follow and hurt her in some way. So again, this is another characteristic of this a lot of Knut Hamsun's characters, not just in this novel. They're unpredictable. They suddenly get this kind of devilish mood about them, and they act upon it. I overtake her once more and walk past her, then abruptly turn around and meet her face to face to observe her. As I stand there looking her straight in the eye, a name I'd never heard before pops into my head. A name with a nervous gliding sound, Ya Jali. Once she is close enough to me, I straighten up and say urgently, "Miss, you're losing your book." I could hear the sound of my heartbeat as I said it. "My book?" she asks her companion, and she walks on. So he refers to her as Yajali, which is just kind of a nonsense made-up word. And he does this throughout the book. We never actually find out what her name is. We never find out what his name is. He does interact with her again later. Shortly after this, he again tells her, "You're losing your book." And eventually her friend says, "Don't mind him," her companion says, pulling her by the arm. "He's drunk. Can't you see the man is drunk?" So that's his first interaction with this lady. This is on page 12, first section. And then he runs into her again later, page 120. And this time she's actually kind of waiting around for him. He notices this lady waiting outside his residence for several days in a row. And then finally he goes and approaches her, and she doesn't really respond to him. She also seems to be a bit strange. Again, this is characteristic of Hamsun's works. He has these irritable, unpredictable narrators, and they're always interacting with these women who are also unpredictable as well. And they like them one minute, don't like them the next, very fickle, very changeable, and totally inconsistent, which is what Hamsun wanted to capture in his write-in. He wanted to show the changeable mind, the inconsistency of human behavior. On the back cover here, George Steiner calls this the classic novel of humiliation, even beyond Dostoevsky. And you can see this throughout this. There's a sense of dread that, okay, life is terrible, and but you got to keep kind of going on. And the character, the narrator, feels less than human. There's several times he compares himself to an insect. One memorable time here, he says, "I felt I was myself a crawling insect doomed to perish, seized by destruction in the midst of a whole world ready to go to sleep. Possessed by strange terrors, I stood up and took several wopen strides down the path. 'No,' I shouted, clenching my fists. 'This has to end.'" So this is when he's out in the park. He's trying to do some write-in. He can't. Again, he has no place to really write. He goes out to the parks and cemeteries and places, and he gets upset by little things. "This has to end." And I sat down again, picked up my pencil once more, and was ready to attack my article in earnest. It would never do to give up when the unpaid rent was staring me in the face. And the end there is, I think, ironic. It's supposed to be a bit funny that, he can't pay his rent. He's out there trying to write a great article. That's obviously what he cares about, writing the great article. But then here he is saying, "I can't give up when I have unpaid rent," as if that's the only thing that keeps him going. As this narrator is starving, there are a lot of kind of moments of comedy in this. There's one part here. It says, "On the way, I passed a newly built house in front of which a couple of carpenters were planing. I picked a few shiny shavings from the pile, stuck one in my mouth, and put the other away in my pocket for later. I kept on going. I groaned from hunger." So here he is just kind of chewing on wood chips. Later in the novel, he says, when it got dark, I trudged over to the jail, God knows how I got there, and sat down on the edge of the balustrade. I ripped a pocket out of my coat and started chewing on it, without any particular purpose, frowning angrily and staring into space with unseeing eyes. So he just rips a pocket out and starts chewing on that. So it's almost like a cartoon image where he's just trying to eat whatever he can. He looks ridiculous. You can't help but laugh at him. At the same time, there's some emotional connection as well. We don't only laugh at him. We can feel bad for the state, his plight. Near the end of section 2, he goes to who he calls Uncle. This is the pawn shop dealer who he tries to sell anything he can. And at this point, he has cut off the buttons of his coat, and he's trying to give these buttons. And of course, he is turned away, and he runs into a friend right outside the pawn shop who's also trying to sell things. Again, they're all artists, and they have no money. "Oh, I had some business." So the friend's asking why he's there. "Oh, I had some business. You're going down there too, I see." "Yes. What did you bring?" My knees shook. I leaned against the wall and held out my hand with the buttons. "What the hell?" he cried. "No, this is going too far." "Good night," I said, turning to go. I had a lump in my throat. "No, wait a moment," he said. What should I wait for? He was on his way to Uncle himself, bringing his engagement ring perhaps. Had been going hungry for several days, was in debt with his landlady. "All right," I answered, "if you will be back quick." "Of course," he said, grabbing my arm. "But the fact is, I don't believe you, idiot that you are. You'd better come with me." I understood what he had in mind, felt another twinge of horror of a sudden, and answered, "I can't. I promised to be at Burt Anchor Street at 7:30, and 7:30, right. But it's 8 now. See, this watch in my hand? That's what I'm taking down there. So, in with you, you hungry sinner. I'll get at least 5 Kroner for you." And he pushed me in. So again, that's the end. He's always kind of saved by the end, and I guess that's the optimistic message in this story, that even though he's struggling and he's starving and he has some triumphs, in the end, well, at least in the end of each section, there's something good to come about. either from his fellow man or his own hard work. This novel also provides some wonderful glimpses of city life in the late 1800s, and also just kind of being young and in love, or young and with energy and wanting to can make a connection, but not having that connection. So it says here, it was around 11. The street was rather dark, and people were strolling about everywhere, a jumble of quiet couples and noisy groups. The great moment had arrived, the maiden hour, when the secret traffic takes place and the jolly adventures begin. Rustling skirts, a few bursts of sensual laughter, heaving breaths, excited, panting breaths. Far down by the Grand Hotel, a voice calling, "Emma!" The entire street was a swamp with hot vapors rising from it. I instinctively searched my pocket for 2 Kroner. So he sees all these couples out, and he wants to get in on the action. So he's feeling for money. This is a reference to like the prostitution or the streetwalkers that would be out there. The passion quivering in every movement of the passers-by, the dim light of the street lamps, the tranquil, pregnant night. It was all beginning to affect me, this air filled with whispers, embraces, trembling confessions, half-spoken words, little squeals. Some cats are making love amid loud shrieks in Blomquist's entranceway, and I didn't have 2 Kroner. It was a torment, a misery like no other, to be so impoverished. What humiliation, what disgrace. So he sees these people in love and together, and they have money and they're enjoying themselves, and he wants in on this action, but he can't be. He can't have part of it. He's broke. His clothes are falling apart. His hair is falling out. That's another thing he has to deal with throughout this novel. A little later on, he says, these young gentry, bank clerks, merchants, boulevard dandies, who didn't even turn up their noses at sailors' wives, that would be the prostitutes, fat duckies from the cattle market who would flop down in the nearest doorway for a crock of beer. What sirens! The place beside them still warm from last night's fireman or groom. The throne always equally vacant, equally wide open. Please step right up. I gave a long spit over the sidewalk without bothering whether it might hit someone, angry with the full of contempt for these people who were rubbing up against one another and pairing off before my very eyes. I lifted my head and felt deep down how blessed I was to be able to follow the straight and narrow. So like this narrator does often in this book, he can't participate with something that he wants to, so he tries to rationalize how, oh, this is horrible, I don't want part of this, I'm above this. So as he's saying here, look at these guys just running around with these sailors' wives. I don't have to be a part of this, I'm walking the straight and narrow. Shortly after, he's approached by a young girl, a streetwalker. She says, at Storton Place, I met a girl who looked hard at me as I came alongside. Good evening, I said. Good evening, she stopped. She was out for a stroll so late? Wasn't it a bit risky for a young lady to walk on Karl Johann Street at this time of night? No? But wasn't she ever accosted or molested? I mean, to put it bluntly, asked to come home with someone. She looked at me in surprise, examining my face to see what I could mean by this. Then she suddenly slipped her hand under my arm and said, "Come along." I went with her. When we were a few steps past the cab stand, I stopped, freed my arm, and said, "Listen, my friend, I don't have a penny." And I prepared to go. At first, she refused to believe me. But when she had gone through all my pockets without anything turning up, she got peeved, tossed her head, and called me a dry stick. "Good night," I said. "Wait a minute," she called. "Those are gold-rimmed glasses, aren't they?" "No." "Then go to blazes." And I went. Shortly afterwards, she came running after me and called me once more. "You can come anyway," she said. I felt humiliated by this offer from a poor streetwalker and said no. Besides, it was getting late, and I had to be somewhere. Nor could she afford such sacrifices. "No, now I want you to come. But I won't go with you under those circumstances. "You're on your way to someone else?" "Of course," she said. "No," I answered. And of course, he doesn't meet with her, and he tries to justify this. He tells her a lie that he's a pastor out there trying to discourage the sex work like this, when really, obviously, that's not the case. He would like to participate in it, but he has no money, and he feels humiliated by her offer. Throughout the novel, the narrator gets kind of progressively more desperate. His housing situation gets worse. In the last section, he's staying at a traveler's lodge with this landlady who really kind of is demeaning to him, doesn't want him there. He's not paying to be there, and she ends up trying to force him out. She lets him stay with her in her own private room with her husband and kids and father. And he decides to leave, but one morning, but then he needs to come back. He doesn't have any place to stay, so he comes back and he catches the husband, who's really kind of a demented, strange man, and he's peeping into the room. And this is where he comes in. He says, "Once inside, I remained stock still. Right in front of me, 2 steps away, stood the landlord himself," that's the husband, "without hat and coat, peeping through the keyhole into the family room. He made mute gestures with his hand to make me stay quiet, and peeped through a keyhole again. He was laughing. 'Come over here,' he said in a whisper. I approached on tiptoe. 'Just look,' he said, laughing with a quiet, excited laughter. 'Take a peek, he. There they lie. Look at the old man. Can you see the old man?' The old man would be his wife's father. In the bed right below Christ's oleograph and directly opposite me, I could see 2 figures, the landlady and the strange mate. The strange mate is the one that took over his room. He's just a sailor. Her legs gleamed white against the dark quilt, and on the bed by the other wall sat her father, the paralyzed graybeard, looking on, hunched over his hands and curled up as usual, without being able to move. I turned around to my landlord. He had the greatest difficulty keeping from laughing loud. He was holding his hand over his nose. 'Did you see the old man?' he whispered. 'Oh Lord, did you see the old man, the way he sits there looking on?' He put his face to the keyhole again." So the narrator is kind of disgusted by this act, this husband that's willing to watch and excited to watch his wife with another man. And why is this in this book? I think partly to show kind of the depravity of society. And this is the society that the narrator does not feel comfortable in, doesn't feel connected to. Eventually, he goes back up to his old room. He actually starts doing some writing there. Then the sailor and the landlady come back up there, and she starts kind of berating him. And this is kind of a comical moment and a moment of a triumph as well. Going down the stairs, I suddenly flew into a rage with this fat, bloated woman who was following hard on my heels to get rid of me in a jiffy, and I stood still for a moment, my mouth full of the most awful epithets, which I had in mind to spit at her. But I thought better of it and held my tongue out of gratitude to the stranger who walked behind her and would hear it all. The landlady was constantly pursuing me, hurling abuse without let up, while my anger increased with every step that I took. We came down into the yard, with me walking very slowly, still trying to decide whether to take on the landlady. I was at this moment frantic with rage, contemplating the most awful bloodshed, a blow that would strike her dead instantly, a kick in the belly, and she's pregnant at the time. A messenger passes me in the entrance. He says hello, but I don't answer. He turns to the matron behind me, and I can hear him asking for me, but I don't turn around. A few steps outside the entrance, the messenger catches up with me, says hello once more, and stops me. He hands me a letter. Angry and reluctant, I tear it open. A 10-krone bill falls out of the envelope, but no letter, not a word. I look at the man and ask, what sort of silly prank is this? Who is this letter from? I don't know, he answers, but it was a lady who gave it to me. And that's Yajali, the one he ran into and kind of harassed. She actually likes him, cares for him, but maybe knows that he is, he's got problems, not a safe person to be with. I stood still. The messenger left. I put the bill back in the envelope, crumbled it up, turned and walked up to the landlady, who is still keeping an eye on me from the entrance, and throw the bill in her face. I didn't say anything, didn't utter a syllable, only notice that she examined the crumpled up paper before I left. And he says, that's how you deal with these brutes. So that's his moment of triumph. He's kind of saved at the end by the lady, Yajali, who he confronted on the street. She gives him money, and then he ends up just throwing this back at the landlady who he owed money to. And this is, again, something that happens throughout this book. He gets something, and he turns around and gives it away. So he's a miserable guy. He can't help himself. He's trying to make it in the world, but even when he gets a good turn, he doesn't take full advantage of that. Some years ago, I taught this novel to a grade 12 class, and a student said, there's no progress, only Kroner. Kroner being the money that this writer is constantly trying to get. And I thought that was kind of a funny and interesting way of summing up this novel, that yes, there isn't really any progress in this novel. The character does not change. That's what, for a book that was published in 1890, that makes it very much kind of a modern work. We have a narrator who doesn't change, or at least doesn't change greatly, yet he's enjoyable to read. It's well written. We get this insight into his suffering, and maybe at the same time, we can suffer along with him a little bit. And by that, perhaps relieve some of our own suffering.